Altruism is really kind of interesting because humans are gregarious creatures. We need to live together in order to survive, but it doesn't always work that way. Most of the news stories that we hear are not about humans helping each other. It's mostly about humans trying to hurt each other. Mass shootings and car wrecks and road rage and whatnot. But the reality is humans are gregarious and we want to help. We need to help. We have this feeling. And as we get more and more crowded, there's 8 billion people in the world. As we get more and more crowded, this may get worse and worse and worse. And that may be true. The news stories may become the norm in the future. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about altruism. Altruism is very real. How do I know? 1977, Everett Sanderson jumped down on the subway tracks to save the life of Michelle de Jesus, only seconds before the onrushing train would have struck her. After failing to jump back onto the platform, Sanderson was pulled to safety at the last instant by onlookers. 1999, David Hutmacher was diagnosed with diverticulitis that required him to miss 6 months of work. With Christmas approaching and his sick and personal leave running out, David was surprised to discover his paychecks continuing to be full. David's coworkers had donated their own sick and personal leave to make up his shortfall. In 1999, athlete Yukiko Marth developed an aggressive form of glomerulonephritis that required an immediate kidney transplant. Charlie Keys, a person that she had a passing acquaintance with, donated a kidney and saved Yukiko's life. An Al-Qaeda terrorist, Usman Khan, attacked the patrons of a London museum with knives and a suicide vest in 2019. After killing 2 patrons and wounding 3, Darren Frost and John Crilly chased Khan out of the building and onto the London Bridge, where they parried the knives with a 5-foot narwhal tusk and a fire extinguisher before Khan was shot and killed. And this is Khan, and this is Darren Frost, actually. And there's Frost. That's the narwhal tusk. Narwhals are like dolphins, except they have a long tusk. It's actually a tooth, of course, and it sticks straight out from their heads. It kind of looks like a unicorn horn, except you can see how long it is. That's a narwhal tusk. So they were fighting him off with this narwhal tusk, and here's John Crilly spraying him with a fire extinguisher. And finally, he was shot and killed. 2007, Cameron Holopeter was waiting for a subway train when he suffered a seizure that threw him onto the tracks. Wesley Autry, seeing the dilemma, jumped onto the tracks and was able to roll the unconscious man into a trench and cover him before a train crushed them both. 1982, Air Florida Flight 90 crashed into the frozen Potomac River in Washington, D.C. 5 passengers and a flight attendant clung to wreckage in the frozen river as a helicopter plucked them off the debris one by one. Ignoring his own safety, Arland Williams helped the other 5 survivors attach themselves to the rescue rope to be whisked to safety. When they went back for Williams, the cold had claimed him and he slipped into the water and died. African-American Otis Gaither smashed through the door of a burning mobile home one night and pulled white Larry Whitten to safety. When Whitten failed to respond, Gaither applied CPR despite the racist symbol that fluttered over the burning structure. And of course, that would be the Confederate battle flag. The Avenue of the Righteous among the nations is a line of trees planted commemorating the hundreds of Europeans who saved Jews during Hitler's Holocaust. At great peril to themselves, they provided haven and food for members of the hunted religion. Samaritans were people of mixed Assyrian and Israeli ancestry who maintained a religion that was similar but not exactly the same as the Israelis. Because they were different, they were despised by the Israelis. One day, an Israeli merchant was robbed, stripped, and left for dead along the road. A priest and a Levite saw him and hustled away, seeing his nakedness and not wanting to soil themselves with his nakedness. A Samaritan came along and bound the merchant's wounds and carried him to an inn to recuperate. He gave the innkeeper a sum of money and promised to make up any difference if his need exceeded the money that he left. So the Israeli holy man ignored the man because he was naked, and the Samaritan not only took care of him but took him back to town and paid for his medical care. That's the story of the Good Samaritan. And that's what Good Samaritan actually means. This is a condemned, hated individual, and he's the only one that helped, and the people who were supposed to have helped didn't. Altruism is the act of concern and helping of someone else with no expectation of gaining anything in return. Why people help has been the subject of much research. The social exchange theory purports that people weigh the costs of such interactions and seek to maximize their rewards and minimize their costs. Rewards provided from helping may be external or internal. External rewards may be in the form of appreciation or friendship. Therefore, we are more likely to help someone whose approval we desire, someone attractive to us. Internal rewards include increased feelings of self-worth, but it also includes reducing the feelings of distress that one might feel caused by the empathy for someone else's pain. Internal rewards, Clary Amodo and Snyder research people who volunteer to help AIDS patients. That should be patients, not patents. They found 6 motivations. Values, to act on humanitarian values and concerns for others. Understanding, to learn about people or learn skills. Social, to be part of a group and gain approval. Career, to enhance job prospects with experience and contacts. Ego protection, to reduce guilt or escape personal problems. Esteem enhancement, to boost self-worth and confidence. Some might contend that altruism has so many internal rewards that people do it more for their own benefit than that of others. Thus, they contend that altruism is a form of egoism, where the real benefit is that of the giving individual. However, Daniel Batson sees altruism as working both as a self-serving and a selfless act. Batson referred to our focus on the sufferer's distress as empathy, genuine sympathy and compassion for the other individual. Such empathy comes naturally. Other animals will come to another's aid. They will comfort the sufferer. They will comfort a victim. They will show distress at another's emotional response. A newborn baby will cry when they hear another baby crying. And this is known as empathy. Empathy produces helping even toward members of rival groups. With their empathy aroused, people will help even when they believe no one will know that they are helping. With their empathy aroused, people will violate their own standards of fairness and justice by giving the person favored treatment. Sometimes people will help others when there is no self-interest involved, but because society prescribes the helping behavior as a norm. There are 2 social norms: reciprocity norms, or expectations that if you help a person, they will help and not hurt you, and social responsibility norms, are expectations that people will help those dependent upon them. Evolutionary psychology purports that animals are driven to maximize the survival of their own genes. Thus, an individual is more likely to put their children's welfare ahead of their own, though children are less likely to sacrifice themselves for their parents. This kin favoritism is referred to as kin selection, favoritism for those who share our genes. This favoritism may be prevalent with people who aren't actually relatives, but who look similar to us. So we're more likely to help somebody that looks like us. Evolutionary psychologists also believe that we may help others because we expect others to return the favor. This is known as reciprocity. While reciprocity is unlikely to work in large impersonal urban areas, it does tend to work in small isolated groups. People in a small group feel closer to the others in the group and will often sacrifice for them with the understanding that when fortunes are reversed, reciprocity will happen. Large and impersonal sometimes has the opposite effect. In 1964, Kitty Genovese was attacked by a knife-wielding rapist in front of her own apartment house in Queens. For 35 minutes, she fought off her rapist while screaming in terror in the middle of the street. 38 of her neighbors were aroused and observed the attack from the safety of their homes. None helped. None even called the police. Kitty Genovese was raped and died from her wounds, her knife wounds. Andrew Mormeal was attacked on a crowded subway car. He was knifed in the stomach. His attackers left the car at the next stop. 11 riders watched the man bleed to death as they rode home. An 18-year-old switchboard operator was sexually assaulted while working alone. She escaped out in the street naked and bleeding with her attacker in pursuit. 40 pedestrians watched as the attacker tried to pull her back inside. 2 policemen happened by and stopped the assault. Eleanor Bradley tripped and broke her leg in a crowded street. Dazed and in pain, she pleaded for help. For 40 minutes, shoppers merely parted and flowed around her. A cab driver finally helped her to a doctor. In June of 2000, a parade that wound past Central Park took a turn for the macabre when groups of drunk men began dousing women with water and tearing the clothes off of and fondling the female parade watchers. Ann Payton was forced to negotiate her way home with her underwear torn away. Police ignored the problem and no calls from cell phones were received despite the thousands who watched the attacks. The Kitty Genovese rape and murder was a wake-up call for social psychologists. Unwilling to accept the callousness of Kitty's neighbors, psychologists began researching to discover how and why such egregious crimes can be watched and allowed to continue with no one lifting a finger to help. Researchers discovered that people in large groups are less observant than people in small groups. This is part of the bystander effect. Research done with smoke pouring from an air vent demonstrated that people in large groups took 4 times as long to see the smoke. Thus, the people in the crowd partying around Eleanor Bradley may not have even noticed Eleanor laying there until after they passed. With advance notice in a less crowded sidewalk, the individual may have been more likely to see Eleanor and evaluate her need. Interpreting, the larger the group of people, the more likely that an individual will accept the implied definition of an event of the group. If everyone else in a group seems unconcerned, an individual is less likely to interpret a situation as negative. This is partially due to pluralistic ignorance, the mistaken interpretation that others are feeling what we are due to our illusion of transparency, the overestimation of others' ability to read our internal states. Latine and Roden staged an experiment around a woman in distress. 70% of the individuals from Malone responded to the woman's obvious distress. 40% of the pairs responded to the woman's distress. Of the 60% who didn't respond, most interpreted the situation as a non-emergency. As the number of people witnessing the emergency increased, the less likely anyone would render assistance. Assuming responsibility, not only are people more likely to misinterpret an actor's actions while in a group, but they are also more likely to misinterpret the willingness of other bystanders to help. It seems that the more people who witness a situation, the more likely each is to assume that someone else will take responsibility for the situation, a diffused responsibility for the action. Diffusion of responsibility studies in large cities and more rural settings show that the fewer the people involved, the more likely people will intervene. Yosef and Corte, looking at New Yorkers' failure time and time again to respond to the aid of other individuals, refers to the atmosphere in large municipalities as sensory overload and compassion fatigue. To exonerate humanity, when people are with people they know, they're more likely to try to help. In 1967, Bryan and Test researched helping patterns in Los Angeles. They discovered that people were more likely to assist a female driver with a flat tire if they observed someone helping a female driver with a flat tire 1/4 of a mile up the road. Bryan and Test went to New Jersey to observe the donation patterns of Christmas shoppers. They found that people were more likely to drop money in a Salvation Army kettle if they had just seen someone else do the same. Rushton and Campbell found that British adults were more willing to donate blood if they are approached after observing someone who has consented to donate blood. One fact of modern life is time restraints that we all live under. A clever experiment by Darley and Batson in 1973 pitted seminary students and a homeless man. Now, seminary students are people that are going to become ministers. They're going to become preachers. And I think this was a Catholic seminary. After listening to the parable of the Good Samaritan, 2 groups of seminary students were confronted with a groaning man on the way to an appointment. For the students under no time constraints, 2/3 stopped to help. Of the students under time constraints, only 10% stopped to help. Now you might think, wait a minute, well that's pretty good. 2/3 of them, of the people that had nothing else to do, stopped. Well, that means that 1/3 of them didn't even stop. Only 10% stopped who had time constraints. That means 90% of them didn't stop. Now, these are going to become our religious leaders, and they don't have the empathy for someone that is in distress. I find that shocking. Personally, I find that shocking. But, maybe today, if we did exactly the same experiment, we would see something totally different. Maybe. Or maybe it would be worse. Researchers have often discovered that people who have been induced to lie will feel guilty to the extent that they will seek to reclaim their public image. Even when the guilt is not observed, the subject is more likely to seek retribution by volunteering or redeeming themselves in one way or another. Researchers have delved into the effect of other negative moods other than guilt and discovered that sometimes it causes less helping behavior and sometimes more. With children, negative moods tend to decrease helping behavior. With adults, negative moods tend to increase helping behavior. Researchers assume that with the adult mind, self-gratification and inner rewards are more possible than they are for children, and that is why the adult is more likely to try to placate their guilty feelings by doing something good. When the researchers looked at the different generosity of elementary, junior high, and high school students, they discovered that as the children aged, they tended to become more socialized and thus more generous. Agreeing with Piaget's developmental theory, children are born selfish and become more and more altruistic as they develop the ability to see the world from another's point of view. Researchers have discovered that in most cases when people feel bad, they try to do good deeds to make themselves feel better, except in 2 circumstances, grief and anger. They also found that when people feel good, they tend to do good deeds. Looking at personality traits, researchers have discovered that there are individual differences in helpfulness and have shown that these differences persist over time. There are a network of traits that predispose a person toward helpfulness, those high in emotionality, empathy, and self-efficacy. High monitoring people are helpful if they think helpfulness will be socially rewarding. Correlational studies looking at 172 studies have shown that when faced with situations where strangers need help that is potentially dangerous, men are more likely to help than females. So the danger has something to do with it. In safer situations, however, women are slightly more likely to help than men. Eagley and Crowley speculated that over the long term, rather than the short term of most experiments, women would be seen as more helpful than men. While there are instances of religious leaders making some fairly significant sacrifices, studies show that intrinsically religious people are only slightly more likely to help in cases of minor emergencies and spontaneous helping acts. As far as donations are concerned, however, 24% of the population makes 48% of the charitable contributions. Gender, looking at 35 studies that compared help given to men and women, looking at 35 studies that compared help given to men and help given to women, men were more likely to offer help to women than to men. Women offered help equally to both genders. Women are more likely to be offered help than men, and single people are more likely to be offered help than two or more people. Men are more likely to offer help to attractive women over unattractive women. Women tend to seek help more than men. Similarity, people are not only more likely to like people who are similar to them, but they're more likely to help people who are similar to them. Less than 50% of people dressed differently made change for an individual as compared to 2/3 who were dressed similarly. When race is a factor, people will help unless the bystander effect is in force. So race tends not to be a factor. Researchers have found that any technique that personalizes bystanders increases willingness to help. Personal request, eye contact, stating one's name, anticipation of interaction. People are more likely to donate blood if the appeal is personal and from a friend. People obviously care about their public image, especially individuals high in self-monitoring. The door-in-the-face technique is a strategy for getting people to help by making a large request that they will no doubt refuse and then accepting a smaller, more reasonable request. Using the door-in-the-face technique, researchers at Arizona State were able to double their contributions. By asking for $250, well, how about $35? No, I'm not going to give you $250. Oh, sure, I'll give you $35. Researchers and historians have discovered that people tend to create a circle of inclusion about them, of the people that they attribute similar moral values and rules. This is known as moral inclusion. Moral exclusion, on the other hand, are all those people outside the sphere of people seen as similar enough to be included. So the people that are like you, that you assume that they're all going to be very similar to you. The people that look like you, the people that act like you, this is known as moral inclusion. So if you have an idea, well, I donate money to the Red Cross, that means all of my friends donate money to the Red Cross. If somebody is not like you at all, somebody is in another group, it's somebody from another town, then it's moral exclusion. You don't have a clue whether they would donate it or not, but they probably don't because they're so much different than you are. And that's moral exclusion. Researchers and historians have noted that individuals who have no moral model to copy are less likely to maintain an altruistic attitude. Susan Harold has even found that pro-social television programming is modeled. However, if people are rewarded or bribed to do what they already like doing, they may lose the intrinsic reward and see the act as extrinsically motivated, the overjustification effect. Oh, and that is the end. Okay, well, I'll talk to you next week. I don't remember what we're talking about next week.